This portion of Election Night is sponsored by the Bell System, keeping your communication system the best in the world. By Polaroid, inventors of instant photography. And by S-Mark, a family of companies serving the families of America.
Estimate. And here is Ronald Reagan. Let's see if we can listen in. He's in his hotel suite in Los Angeles. I don't think we had audio from that picture anyway. It was a brief shot that they permitted us as he obviously took a congratulatory call from a friend. We assume that that call was not from President Carter. He said he called him some time ago to concede the election and to congratulate him, as did John Anderson, the independent candidate, who incidentally now has a 6% of the votes, with just 50% of the national vote counted. Incidentally, with that 50%, half the nation's vote counted. It's 50% still for Reagan, 43% for Carter, 6% for John Anderson. And for Ed Clark, the Libertarian candidate, just a bare 1% of the vote. That 6% for Anderson, if it holds up all evening through the Western state count, will mean that he will collect federal matching funds and perhaps be able to retire a great portion, if not all, of his presidential campaign debt. Let's go now to those Western states and a report from our Western regional reporter, Leslie Stahl.
Walter, Ronald Reagan is taking the West by storm. Let's look at the recap board and see how well he is doing. We don't have any returns in yet from the state of Alaska, but he is decisively beating Jimmy Carter in Arizona. In Colorado, it's, according to our estimate, 58 for Reagan, 32 for Carter. In Idaho, it's 74 for Reagan, 21 for Carter. Montana, 58 to 35. Reagan is winning has won, according to our estimate, or at least is leading in Nevada. Ronald Reagan has won New Mexico, Utah, Washington, where Carter went just yesterday. According to our estimate, he'll win there with 55 to 36 for Carter, and Reagan in Wyoming, 66 to 28. It's an absolute landslide, just trouncing him. As you said, Walter, Warren Magnuson has gone down to defeat in Washington. Age was the big issue, as it was when Jacob Javits ran in the primary here. His opponent, the man who has won, the Republican, Slade Gordon, the Attorney General, raised the age issue very subtly in his ads by jogging and bicycling, never really hitting it straight on. But that and the Reagan landslide in Washington has gone to defeat the senior member of the Senate, the chairman of the Appropriations Committee, who, by the way, brought the state $1 billion in relief aid for the victims of Mount St. Helens, but that was not enough to convince the voters of Washington to return him to the Senate. He's been in Congress for 44 years, Walter.
Leslie, can you make any suggestion as to what the percentage of vote Reagan is getting over Carter in the West? Because we've got, with 50% of the vote counted, popular vote is now 50% only for Reagan, and clearly the West is going to
It's much
up
more
that
than
number.
that. It's 2 to 1 in the West, generally speaking, but we don't have California in yet, and that is about half the West. The interesting thing to watch in the West is that McGovern lost the West with 39% of the vote. And with the states we have so far, Jimmy Carter's defeat could be greater, but it really is difficult to say without the California returns.
At any rate, we can be quite certain that when all of your states are in from the West, we're going to see a much higher percentage of the national vote for Ronald Reagan. This isn't going to be one of those cases which we've had in the past history where a man who wins the presidency with just a bare majority of the votes and sometimes even not a majority of the votes. That has happened in our history 4 times in this century, as a matter of fact, but it's not likely to happen this time with this huge electoral landslide of Ronald Reagan's. CBS News coverage of the presidential election and all the state races will continue in a moment.
Who's that? Dad!
Hi, Chucky. Hi, sweetheart.
Who are you?
Daddy!
Hey, Ellen. Hey, everybody. I'm home for dinner.
Give us a second to get over the shock.
When Rudy and his brother started a construction company, working late seemed to become a way of life. The better business got, the more there was to do, with less time to do it in. Then they bought a low-priced IBM computer, the 5120. the perfect computer for small companies with big plans. It helps prepare job estimates, track costs.
Hello. Look, do me a favor. Check the concrete costs, huh?
Okay, hold on.
Figure equipment needs and material needs.
Under by $2,400.
IBM never stops searching for new ways to make difficult jobs easier, so people can do more important things, like go home for dinner.
It's going to be strange eating a dinner that hasn't been reheated.
We could wait a while and let it get cold.
Daddy!
IBM, helping put information to work for people.
Nancy Hamilton will cross our path 8 times today. We're S-Mark. We own the companies that supply her peanut butter and turkeys, rubber gloves, baby nursers, her daughter's danskin tights, fertilizer, oil filters, and motor oil. We're S-Mark, a big company with a big stake in Nancy Hamilton and in you.
Where in the world are we? Now, what's this place?
Welcome to the last place on earth.
Look at all this.
Dear?
Like my boutique? Cute.
Yeah, we just have traveler's checks.
Citicorp?
Yes.
Love them.
Imagine Citicorp traveler's checks are even accepted in the last place on earth.
Our lucky day.
Travel the world with us, Citicorp traveler's checks.
According to our CBS News estimate, another state for Reagan, Oregon, has fallen into his long list of states he's won tonight. That was another one that even the Republicans had thought maybe the Democrats would take tonight. Well, they didn't. Reagan has made a clean sweep now of all of the western states that we have been able to count so far. Everything west of the Mississippi except Minnesota has gone for Reagan on our count. Let's get an update now from Bill Plant at the Century Plaza Hotel on what's happened to Governor Reagan. We thought we'd be down there amongst you by now, Bill.
Walter, we're expecting Governor Reagan in about 20-25 minutes, but we know that earlier you saw some pictures of Governor Reagan up in his suite. Some of us were up there then, and I can tell you that he is absolutely overjoyed. He's talking on the telephone to people around the country, and we heard him say to Governor William Clements of Texas, said, "I feel just great. This is just unbelievable, isn't it?" And it's plain that not only Ronald Reagan, but also Nancy Reagan feels that way. She told us that she was relieved. She also said that she'd be happy to get some sleep. Reagan's pollster, Richard Worthland, now projects that they'll probably get more than 400 electoral votes. They had said about 390, as you heard earlier before. I think now it'll go over the 400 mark. The governor's been working on his speech, the one that he'll give down here when he comes in.
Bill,
So.
Bill,
Yeah,
let me interrupt you. California, according to the CBS News estimate, has gone for Ronald Reagan. I don't think anybody really expected otherwise. Even President Carter didn't make a last-minute campaign appearance there despite his earlier plans. But that state is in the Reagan camp now, and that puts his electoral count up there, 348 now. Go ahead, Bill.
Walter, the electoral count at 348 and still climbing is pretty much what the Reagan strategists expect. We were telling you that up in his suite, Governor Reagan was calling people around the country. We know that he talked to Senator Paul Laxalt, his close friend and the nominal manager of his campaign. They're very close. He talked to Governor Jim Rhodes of Ohio, somebody who's been with him frequently on the campaign trail, making all of those courtesy calls that a politician will make either in defeat or victory. We learned a little bit too, Walter, about what Governor Reagan talked to the president about. He described it as a very, very nice offer from the president to aid in the transition. He said that he had accepted that because he wanted a smooth transition as well. So it's quite plain that they are absolutely delighted, and we expect to see them down here, Walter, very shortly.
Well, Bill, have you heard anything about who will head up his transition team? We heard it might be James Baker, who came to him somewhat reluctantly from the George Bush campaigns.
Walter, we understand that decision has not been made yet. It was due to be made at a noon lunch of the senior staff today. It wasn't made. We're not quite sure why, but we expect that it will be made tomorrow. Names that come up include that of Jim Baker, as you mentioned, Ed Meese, who is the governor's chief of staff, and who will certainly have some major role in a Reagan administration. And, of course, there's Michael Deaver, who is very close, the governor's closest personal aide. We'll hear that tomorrow, we think.
Bill, we also had a report that was carried on Reuters tonight that Bill Casey, the campaign chief, had said that Richard Allen, as of tonight, is back on the Reagan staff. Is there any significance in that?
Well, it wasn't clear to us whether he was going to stay off the staff or not. They were fairly frank in admitting that they didn't want that as a problem in the last few days of the campaign. They didn't want that to be ammunition for the Carter camp. So Mr. Allen voluntarily took himself off, and of course, if he hadn't done it voluntarily, they would have done it for him. He is back. He's wearing his staff pin, and we expect that he will be part of the transition team. His specialty, as you know, is foreign affairs.
Thank you very much, Bill. We'll be talking more with you later on tonight, certainly, and we'll be waiting to hear from Ronald Reagan when he appears there with his victory statement to his supporters at the Century Plaza Hotel in Los Angeles. CBS News Election Night coverage will continue in a moment.
I'm Arch McGill from the Bell System with news of an advanced communication system that helps many industries manage their energy costs, from heating and cooling to lighting. It uses our electronic dimension PBX and standard telephone wiring. At Chicago's McCormick Inn, it reduces energy consumption 28%. Energy management through communications from Bell.
Tim Braley, Brake Quality Inspector. This is who we are and what we do at General Motors.
Quality is the #1 priority at our plant, because the brake is the most, as far as I'm concerned, the most vital part in the car. It's got to work every time. I feel like my job's got a lot of responsibility. If one bad brake got out, I'd feel terrible. I really would. I'm definitely not going to let that happen. I have a lot of pride in my job.
General Motors, people building transportation to serve people.
A company called TRW has devised a new way to look at the universe. Using video cameras and computer-controlled telescopes developed for the Air Force, it can find and track an object no bigger than a soccer ball, 22,000 miles up. It will see more stars in an hour than man has ever cataloged. Tomorrow is taking shape at a company called TRW.
The feeling comes out in an instant. You're one step closer to what you're all about. Touch the button, touch the moment, touch the people you love. In an instant, make a memory.
The easiest way to share a good time while it's still happening. Polaroid's One Step, the world's simplest camera.
Over half of the vote has been counted now on this election day in 1980, and as you know by now, Ronald Reagan has won an overwhelming victory. It doesn't show in that popular vote quite yet. With 53% of the vote counted, the popular vote shows him with just 50% of the vote. Jimmy Carter, the incumbent president, 43%, and John Anderson, 6%. But the western states have not been tabulated in a lot of that count so far, and it is expected that his popular percentage will climb considerably when those states which are going overwhelmingly for him will be tabulated along with the rest of the votes. But in electoral vote, it is just simply overwhelming. 33 states he's won to 5 states, and including the District of Columbia for President Carter. 348 electoral votes, far in excess of the 270 needed. President Carter has won just 35. As you heard, President Carter conceded quite a long time ago now to his followers in a meeting in Washington, and also in a phone call to Governor Reagan in California. We're waiting for Governor Reagan to appear at the Century Plaza Hotel ballroom, where he's en route now, we hear, but it'll be some minutes before he actually appears there. And until that time, and perhaps through that time, we're going to talk with a man who 4 years ago knew the bitterness of no defeat like this one tonight, but a terribly, terribly narrow defeat. The former President of the United States, Mr. Gerald Ford.
Walter, how are you?
Well, I'm delighted to see you with us tonight, sir.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
What do you think about these returns, besides joy for your party?
I'm really, pleased to begin with, because an awful lot of people worked very, very hard. I believe our party was more unified. We had better organization. But I am very surprised with the magnitude of the electoral vote that I thought would be very close, with so many states, according to the polls, relatively close. My general impression is that the momentum away from a narrow electoral victory for Reagan began at the time of the debate. That momentum began to build. Economic figures came out that weren't very encouraging to President Carter. I believe the impasse that developed over the weekend in the hostage situation probably, on balance, was adverse to President Carter. So a lot of things all sort of culminated at a wrong time from President Carter's point of view. And Governor Reagan, fortunately, made no mistakes that I think were serious. And with the party unity and party effort, this is what happened.
You know, you're one of the very rare experts at transition. Having had
I've gone through it.
You've gone through it. What do you see as the problems? And this is a rather a big transition this time. It may be that he'll carry the Senate with him, for instance. They'll have an opportunity to work with a legislature that at least is half on his side, at least by party credentials. What do you think is going to happen here?
Well, you've got a combination of things that are somewhat different from what they were when I left the White House and President Carter took over. We have a lame duck session of the Congress coming up, I think, on the 10th of November, which is just a few days away. There is a great deal of unfinished business that the Congress has on its platter. They haven't yet passed the budget for the fiscal year that started October 1st. And so they not only have the budget problems, but other undone legislation.
Well, that lame duck Congress listened to the people's voice as expressed through this conservative victory across the country and react accordingly?
Walter, I think they would be very, very foolish if this lame duck Congress, which is more liberal than the one that was elected today, if they try to ram through some legislation that would be contrary to what is the public sentiment expressed on November 4th, there would be a lot of unhappiness among many, many millions of Americans. So my best judgment is that this Congress, in the days they are in session before Thanksgiving, will probably do the routine things, finish the budget and a few other items, but then call it quits.
What about the matter of the hostages now and the entire arrangements we must make with Tehran? Clearly, almost any deal that the president makes with Tehran is going to have a long-range effect on our Middle Eastern policy in the critical area of the Persian Gulf. Can the incoming president have an input to that policy, or do you see that as outside the possibilities?
As I flew from California today, and I left California about 2 o'clock and got to New York just three-quarters of an hour ago, I thought about the question that you've asked. I haven't called President Carter. I tried to call Governor Reagan, and he was on his way to, I think, the Century Plaza. So what I say is totally on my own. It seems to me that the hostage problem is now out of the political arena, period. It is a question that ought to be approached from a unity point of view. I would suggest that President Carter bring in Governor Reagan, his advisors. I believe President Carter ought to bring in the Democratic and Republican leaders of the Senate, the House, and try to have a united front and a determination on behalf of all of us, regardless of political faith, to try and negotiate and to recover the hostages. Whether that's practical or not, I can't tell you. But it seems to me what we need right now is unity so that the Ayatollah and the Iranian government, whatever it may be, understands that they can't undercut one element in the United States to achieve something on their behalf.
Would you be willing to offer your services as a transition member of that for that purpose?
If I was asked, Walter, of course. But I think it would have to be a broad front. I just wouldn't want to be one out of many if we had a total unity approach, which would include Governor Reagan, the Democratic Republican leaders, working in conjunction with President Carter. Of course, I would be willing to participate.
What about a permanent role in the Reagan administration?
Walter, I think I told you last summer I didn't want a job. I don't have any ambitions for a job. On the other hand, I'll be anxious to help if Governor Reagan wants me to in any way on a temporary or short-term basis. And he and I have developed a very good relationship, and I expect on maybe one or more occasions he might ask for some advice.
Are you absolutely rejecting a permanent, a cabinet job?
Absolutely, yes.
Do you have any idea who he might pick for defense and Secretary of State?
I have not talked to him about any names. I've been so preoccupied in this campaign that I really haven't had an opportunity to talk with him about personalities. I have some ideas, but I don't think I ought to mention them until I've had a chance to talk to him personally.
Would you urge Henry Kissinger to be back in the cabinet?
Well, Henry's one of my favorites, as you well know, and I think any president would be well advised to take advantage of Henry's experience, his talents, his dedication. But I don't want to prejudice Henry or in any way interfere. So I think I better just not get into personality.
Mr. President, you said you hadn't had a chance to talk to Governor Reagan yet. He's now, as you see, coming into the Century Plaza Ballroom, and we're going to hear from him in a moment. I'll tell you what, if you stick around, we'll see if we can possibly establish communication, and maybe you can have a word with him when he finishes up there.
Fine. I tried to call him, but he was on his way to where he is, I guess.
I know he's going to have a great deal to say to you, sir, but I don't think we've ever seen a former president of the United States go out on the campaign trail quite with the vitality and the all-out commitment that we watched you perform for.
I got a little vigorous out there. Betty gave me a little advice that I ought to calm down a little bit, but she said it may look good in Detroit, but it doesn't look so good on television.
Speaking of some of your stronger statements,
I watched one of them and I had to agree with it, but it sure helped the crowd with a little enthusiasm.
Which one would you look back on with some embarrassment?
Well, I think it was in Peoria when I said Jimmy Carter had blown it. And I said it with some vigor. I think he has, but it didn't look as good on television as it sounded out there.
Well, no matter how it sounded, it turned out to be prophetic.
Yeah, well. I think I should have learned the lesson that Teddy Kennedy finally learned with convention hall speeches don't always look as good on television as they may sound in a big auditorium.
By the way, let me ask you one other question while we're watching Governor Reagan and Nancy Reagan and their family waving to the crowd out there. Obvious joy over the smashing victory tonight. John Anderson kind of hinted tonight at the possibility of another run for it. It was just a hint, but and he said it was an enigmatic statement that they had taken the wrong way when they cheered for him. Do you think he would have any role in the Republican Party if he came back to the fold?
If I were in the House of Representatives and wanted to continue to build the party on a broader basis, I would find a place for John. I would hope that the party...
Excuse me, sir, I think Governor Reagan's about to speak.
Thanks very much. Thank you. You know, here we are. This is... You know, we're all here but one now, and he was here, but they just took him off stage. It's way past his bedtime. But let me just say first of all, this has been, well, there's never been a more humbling moment in my life. I would have been not only humbled by the extent of what has happened tonight, even if it had been the cliffhanger that all of us, I think, were expecting, it would have been the same way, but just to have had the support of the people of this country. I consider the trust that you have placed in me sacred, and I give you my sacred oath that I will do my utmost to justify your faith. Earlier this evening, I spoke on the phone with President Carter. He called, John Anderson called, but the President pledged the utmost in cooperation in the transition that will take place in these coming months. I offered him my own cooperation. He graciously said that he wanted this to be the
Governor Reagan, we just wanted to show you what the map of the United States looks like as of 8 o'clock tonight.
Hey!
It's all yours.
Oh.